Ladies and gentlemen, this is Jason Lewis, the producer of the From the Shadows podcast, and I would like to welcome you back to this week's episode of the podcast, where we will continue with the enthralling interview with Nick Redfern. So without any more delay, let's continue with the interview right where we left off last week. If you happen to have missed last week's episode, well, you've missed a lot. So go back and listen to what you've missed. And for the rest of us, we'll continue on. Enjoy.
So, a lot of people don't think of that the idea that the government may be hiding things because they actually don't know what's going on, rather than that they do know what's going on.
It's probably better for people to think, oh, they know what's going on and they're hiding it, than to actually think,
Say, hey,
God, they
really
don't know anything. They don't know anything.
Well, I mean,
exactly.
You'd have to concede. I mean, if the government had bodies, they would have to concede. A cursory understanding of cosmology, says, look, the nearest star is 4 million light years away, and so for something to travel from let alone our galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, or somewhere other, we're talking about a species that would have probably evolved millions of years before the Earth. And therefore, they have mastered some sort of they've mined the lithium crystals like in Star Trek or whatever it is. But they would have but you'd have to have some sort of propulsion system that would allow you to do interstellar travel.
Well, if we have all this super technology, then why is the best thing they can do to you, Nick, is just call you up on the phone and make it sound like somebody's trying to fax you a form over your cell phone with the noise coming through? How does that tie? You know what I'm saying? Like, that's nothing. Like,
if
they're like have this super technology, if we have all the super technology and they're trying to hide it from you or scare you off, then why are they doing the same stuff the judge used to do back to teenage girls and call up and breathe heavy in the phone?
I'm sure Nick has went to the pub and got home at 3:00 in the morning and called an ex-girlfriend and things like that. Like
I think what they were trying to do is, like you said, they don't.
Nick doesn't have to answer that question.
Yeah,
we already know.
They don't want us to lose faith in our government structures. Like you said, we have a social contract.
It's too late.
That's what makes society work.
Right.
And on top of that, if it was anybody that would have that technology that can travel from millions of light years away in a time span that would be favorable, that we would actually be able to communicate with them and they can go back and forth, well, then their physics has got to be they have a better understanding of physics than we do.
Well, they'd have to have some sort of gravity drive.
Well, I think more than likely, I think they've probably learned how to manipulate time and space.
We can't even get a highway for more than a mile that doesn't have 5 giant potholes in it, let alone travel. You know what I'm saying?
So, Nick, in your research,
right.
Nick, you have an angle on aliens possibly master of space-time, being able to somehow bend space-time in order to probably transport from one part of the universe to the other part of the universe.
Well, yeah, I mean, if aliens are coming here and, they're coming from another star system, I mean, there's no way that they could use the kind of technology that we're using now, because it would literally take millions of years, hundreds of thousands of years. I mean, the nearest star from here is 4.2 light years away, and a light year is 186,000 miles every second. Mm-hmm. So that means for us to travel, even for us to travel at 186,000 miles per second, it would still take us 4 years to get to the nearest star. That's how far away we are. Which sounds, it's almost impossible to get your head around that kind of distance. So I think the only way they could get from there to here, well, I'd say there's 2 ways. One is that, somehow kind of bending time. So you kind of distort time. So, what would normally be, literally like a 10,000 year flight, bending time, you could do it perhaps in minutes or seconds. And the other angle would be not so much bending time, but sort of jumping dimensions, which would be kind of almost identical but slightly different. You know, on the one hand, you're altering time or you're bending time, but in the other one, you're jumping like from one reality to another. So I think it has to be one or two of those, and because I cannot see really any other way how you could cover such vast distances in such a quick time, you know.
Yeah, and it was Enrico Fermi, the Italian.
Suave.
Yeah, not Enrico Suave.
Enrico
That was
Suave?
me.
Okay.
Or was it Enrico Fermi came up with the Fermi paradox to explain why we haven't had any real evidence of other civilizations, and you talk about that with the Fermi paradox and stuff like that.
So what then? You know, we're talking about the Men in Black. What role do they play? Are they a government entity? Are they an alien entity? What are they, or what do you believe they are?
Well, I've written 4 books on the Men in Black and one on sort of the lesser known Women in Black phenomenon. And you know, if you bring up the issue of the Men in Black, most people, particularly outside of this subject, you know, they'll think of Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones, you know, because that's everybody. You know, you don't have to be into all this to know what the Men in Black are, because the movies were so successful that everybody know. You know, you could ask your next door neighbor, who are the Men in Black? Oh yeah, those people who go after the aliens. Everybody knows that now. But in the movies, you know, which were good fun, you know, they're entertaining movies, but the Hollywood chose to present the Men in Black as kind of like UFO James Bonds, you know, that kind of thing. But if you speak to the vast majority of all the MIB witnesses, you know, somebody sees a UFO or they have an abduction encounter and they get a knock on the door late at night, kind of similar to the Black-Eyed Children, actually, you know, and they find a way into the home and they threaten people not to talk about UFOs, and they, you know, they still to this day wear the black suits. And interestingly enough, even today, when people have seen the Men in Black, they've still been wearing like the fedoras that they wore, and this is talked about back in the 50s. So, you know, there is kind of a parallel and a crossover between the Hat Man and the Men in Black. But what's weird about the Men in Black is that they don't look entirely human and entirely normal. Some of them have said their skin kind of looks like a really thin but sophisticated mask, almost like somebody who'd had plastic surgery if they got burned, kind of something like that. Their skin didn't look completely right. And some of them said their eyes kind of looked slightly bigger than normal. And in some cases, people have said they're wearing these wraparound sunglasses, which might explain, you know, the reason might be because they don't want to show off these sort of large eyes. So I think, you know, with you got the fedora hats and the pulled down, the pulled up collar and the sunglasses, which are really big. I think there's an atmosphere here of like camouflage. They kind of look vaguely like us, but if you were to see them up close up, you would see some differences. And one of the things a lot of people have said is that when they looked at the Men in Black, they couldn't figure out how old they were. It was, you know, were they like 30? Were they like 50 but looked 30, or were they kind of 30? You know, it was like they kind of looked like someone who just you couldn't figure their age. Because they just had no lines, but it was like too smooth, you know, as if they'd been pulled back.
Kind of like they did in. I'm a big Star Wars fan, like they did to Grand Moff Tarkin in Rogue One. If you're familiar with that, with the computer generated face that makes someone who's not even alive anymore. They took their likeness.
But if you want to sort of get a good picture of how most of the witnesses describe the Men in Black. It's not, as I said, like the Will Smith, Tommy Lee Jones movies, but it does relate to a movie. The best way I can describe them is if you see a movie that came out in 1998, and it was called, I've forgotten the name. I'll have to remember the name, but it was kind of like The Matrix, but it came before The Matrix. Oh, Dark City. That's what
Oh, it's a
title.
wonderful movie, great movie.
Yeah. Well, if you see Dark City, in that movie, you've got Men in Black type characters who come out at night and they wear the old style hats, and they look really skinny and they look pale. And they just don't look fully human. So for people listening who want to know what the real Men in Black look like, watch Dark City, and you'll get a good vision of them.
Alyssa, is that what the guy that asked for your number looked like?
Well, he did not look like a human, that's for sure. His face was super pale. I mean, he looked, I don't know, really young. There was 4 of them. And they looked really young, super pale, really sharp dressed, had sunglasses on, and it was just really weird.
Now, did they speak? Did they speak to you, Alyssa? Lisa?
No, they didn't even make. This is the weird thing. Me and my mom went to the store, and there was about 4 parking spaces from us. And me and my mom looked at each other, and we made jokes. And I said, "Wouldn't that be funny if that was the Men in Black?" They looked at me and laughed. Like, there was no way they could have heard me. And I went into the store and we came back out, and they were gone. And right away, I got hold of Nick, telling him what I seen. And I think it was the next day he called me, and I told him what happened. And the only thing I can think of is my grandpa lives not even less than 10 minutes from the Space Center. So I don't know if that has any connection with it or what.
Very
It was
interesting.
strange. I mean, and the way you described it, was similar to, particularly like the pale skin, and they usually are. Rarely, there are some, like a couple of famous ones where there was just one Man in Black, but it usually is 2 or 3, and they sort of have these starry eyes and white. The skin is like white, kind of like the black-eyed children. So I do sometimes wonder if, because with the clothing and everything else, if the Hat Man, the Shadow People, the Men in Black, Black-Eyed Children, I sometimes wonder they could actually all be part of the same phenomenon,
And so you're of the belief this is from the alien side. They're coming to check.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the Men in Black, if there's so many stories of the Men in Black going back to the early 50s right to now, and for me, this is not one that you can put the blame on the government. The real Men in Black are not from the government. There's something much, much weirder.
Well, the real problem I have with the Hollywood version of Men in Black is, in being a mailman, is how they portrayed the post office in the Men in Black. Those being where they hide all the aliens and let those guys be the mail characters.
Yeah, you need somebody who's responsible.
I know. I can't throw. We can't. Those are
Nick,
unacceptable
what about
standards.
a theory? I mean, what about a theory that the Men in Black do work for the government? However, the aliens and the government have been working together for years. That we've almost have a other government agency type situation. Why the reason why it costs $500 for a toilet seat is because in government spending they funnel this money somehow.
Imagine
Imagine
how much reading you could get done with a $500 toilet seat.
It depends on how comfortable it really is. But I mean, any theory as to that possibly, the Men in Black have partnered with the government, secret government agency that operates, below the, the radar of the FBI, CIA, and stuff like that to work in tandem for whatever reason that might be.
Oh, well, that's interesting because there are a few stories, not many, but there's a famous story of a guy who worked at Area 51 in the early 1970s. And, a lot of the guys who work at Area 51, they're out there for like a week, 10 days, and then they come back home, back to Nevada, Las Vegas, wherever they live, for 2 days, and then they go back for another 8 days. So, in other words, because they're out at Area 51 for such a long time, like a week on and 4 days off, that kind of thing, they've got like a cafeterias and just everything you'll need, beds, everything, And there was a guy who came forward and said that one particular day, this was like 1972, 73, that everybody who was in the cafeteria was told to go and sit over the other side of the cafeteria. And they said these weird guys in black suits, looking really pale and strange, shuffled in and just kind of sat down there staring at the employees, and then the security guys said, okay, you need to leave now, and they didn't know what happened after that. But yeah, you sit having your lunch, and then suddenly, these skinny, pale-faced guys sit down next to you, and then the security guards come along and say, okay, we can't have you in here with these. And then people say, well, what are they? What's none of your business, kind of thing,
Jeez.
So there are stories like that where there might be some sort of connection between the government working or at the very least, having knowledge of the Men in Black. But I think to a great degree the government knows there is a genuine and very weird mystery surrounding the Men in Black, but I don't think the government knows exactly what the MIB are. Are they aliens, or are they paranormal creatures, or are they connected to the occult, kind of like with the Hat Man? But the government knows enough to know that there is an MIB phenomenon.
Do you have any information on, since we are in Ohio, we're broadcasting from Ohio, that whatever spacecraft crashed in Roswell was put on a train and brought to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Now I haven't really sort of investigated, the whole Wright-Patterson, Ohio stuff. But I mean, I've read a lot of that stuff. I mean, that's sort of Wright-Patterson. I mean, that's kind of viewed for a lot of people before Area 51 came on the scene. Wright-Patterson was seen as the place where, crashed UFOs and dead aliens were all stored. I mean,
Hangar 18 is what.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Hangar 18.
And I'm sure people when they go on tours of Wright-Patterson today, you can go on tours there. I'm sure, out of every 20 people who go on the tour, I'm sure one or two say, where do you keep the aliens?
Now,
I'm sure they get tired of hearing that question all the time.
Now, you said the word tour, and I want to segue into something that the judge was very interested in, was the tour that you took.
Oh, yeah.
With a couple.
Okay, so all right, so Nick, having been a younger man and having enjoyed the creature known as whiskey, I was fascinated with your story when you and two buddies decided that you were going to take 6 weeks and travel about Great Britain in search of monsters and creatures and whatnot. And
go slow telling this because we're taking notes.
Oh, this is...
Well,
I'm sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, what better thing could any guy do than to get two guys in an RV for 6 weeks and travel all over the country, hitting every bar and pub there is, and looking for monsters? I mean, is there a better life scenario than
Was that the best 6 weeks of your life? Just go ahead and admit it now.
Well, it was definitely one of them. But yeah, I mean, we were all friends. We still are all friends. I don't see them that much often anymore, unfortunately. But we still, Facebook, phones now and again. But yeah, this it kind of sort of epitomizes basically what all of us do in this field. Is that you can, if you want to find Bigfoot, you want to find lake monsters, you want to find this strange creature, that strange creature, you really do have to go looking for them, and that's what we all still do, and because I think that's the only way to get the answers. And one of the good things is, you don't have to always go a long way to track down, a strange creature. I mean, I'm sure every single U.S. state has probably a couple of dozen stories of, the lake monster in this area, or the paranormal creature that lives under the bridge, that kind of thing. And so, I mean, as well as hopefully finding some answers, as you said, you can have a good, fun time sort of traveling around and checking out different places and investigating this, investigating that. And that's what I did, with the book, was to sort of write it in journal style.
Kind of like a travel log.
Yeah, like a travel log, and keep it as it is. You sort of get in the vehicle, you crank up the music and hit the road and put the Ramones on or something like that, you know, and then you just go looking off for monsters and have a good time and hopefully, you know, find something in the process.
Now, the Dallas Journal-Express did a review of this book, and they said, envision Hunter Thompson.
Which I assume is
well, hold on.
isn't it?
Hunter
Okay,
Thompson, Iggy Pop, and Keith Richards joining the cast of the X-Files. So the question is,
Who are you?
who are you? Are you Hunter Thompson, Iggy Pop, or Keith Richards?
I think I'd go for Iggy Pop.
Oh,
okay.
All right.
Well, because I grew up on punk music, you know, and he was with the Stooges and all that, and you know, he was. I wasn't around, you know, when listening to music when the Stooges around. You know, I just wasn't around. But you know, in terms of my favorite music is punk music. That's what I love.
So were you a big Sex Pistols fan?
Yeah, my two favorite bands. I can't sort of put it down to one. My two favorite bands are the Ramones and the Misfits. And
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So you know, and he's kind of like a punk guy, you know. So, but that's amazing. You found that. I remember that review. I don't know how you got hold of that.
Hey, the judge does his research. All right.
That's right.
No, but
Yeah,
I
he does.
stumbled upon the book.
But,
I stumbled upon the book. You can buy it on Amazon, by the way. And I thought, my gosh, get two guys to go with you and just travel about in an RV and go to bars and meet people and talk about the paranormal and monsters. And you guys went after the Monkey Man, and just what a great adventure to take 6 weeks out of your life. I think I can imagine that Jason, the super producer, and Grover here, our host, and the three of us getting in an RV and taking off. And
You know why he likes it? Because I don't drink.
Absolutely.
We got a driver.
So these guys know that they can just do even crazier stuff than what you guys did.
Well, you know, but I mean, you know, that's what very often happens on, you know, expeditions. It does become a road trip because, you know, you're going looking for something, and you know, expeditions, and just as you're going along, you just have a good time. You know, whether you're looking for Mothman or whatever it is. And I think, you know, most people who go on into the field, so to speak, would agree with me that you do have like a high degree of like camaraderie, where you would all hang out together, and you know, you make friends, and that's not the primary reason you went out there, but that's how it happened. You know, it's like it's human nature. You make memories, you make friends, and look for monsters.
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna be attracted to the same people that are like-minded and enjoy the same things.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Now on. So what have you had any personal experiences, either paranormal, supernatural, or cryptid yourself?
And we asked that question because we had Ken Gerhardt on.
Yes, yeah.
And Ken said, you know, I've talked to all these people, but I've never personally had an experience like this. So
yeah. Well, I've had a few, kind of like Ken. I haven't had that many things. I do get a lot of synchronicities, and you know, which people, you know, if you don't know what a synchronicity is, for any of the listeners, it's basically if you have like a meaningful coincidence where, you know, as if something which is such a strange coincidence is almost like, you know, some supernatural power sort of made something happen that you would never believe could have happened, you know, sort of a really wild coincidence. I never kind of dismiss synchronicities, because I think something is kind of driving you down this path or that way, and you shouldn't ignore it. But I actually did once, probably about, I honestly couldn't tell you now, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, but I had a hat man dream in the dead of night, and I was like semi-paralyzed, and I just saw like a vague shadow, and it probably lasted maybe 10, 15 seconds, but I mean, but it was, you know, it was like a classic situation like that. Beyond that, not really, you know, not really too much. But I guess my job is more to sort of chronicle people's experiences, rather than running into Nessie and Bigfoot every other week or whatever.
Are you okay with that you're not running into Bigfoot and Hatman on a regular basis?
Well, I mean, obviously, I'd prefer it if one day I could actually, see these things sort of, in the daylight and actually see them for what they are and get up close, or be on the shores of this lake or that lake, looking for Champ or Ogo Pogo and get definitive footage. I mean, that would be, the primary goal, obviously, for anybody who does this. But, I've spoken to a lot of genuine, very highly credible people, which for me is an important thing because it demonstrates you're not wasting your time, that there are people who've seen these things and photographed them, filmed, etc. So yeah, I'd like to be on the other side of it, where I could say yes, I saw it. But as I said, I've still got that enthusiasm right as a kid. So I'll just keep doing it. Then hopefully, we'll find one of these things. And if not, well, hopefully I did the best job that I could.
So are you saying if we showed up tomorrow with an RV in front of the house, you'd be game to go?
Yeah.
I mean, the way I look at it, I have a C class.
I'm joining. I'm coming along.
Hey, there's no girls allowed on this. So Nick, what do you, if you could discover one thing definitively for yourself, what would be the one thing that above all else that you'd really like to experience and know beyond a shadow of a doubt that
now take out the monetizing factor of
it.
Yeah.
Just
anybody that found a carcass of Bigfoot would say, well, yeah, and I'm now instantly a millionaire.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying is, what would be the one thing that if you could only have one thing happen that you just absolutely knew for a fact?
If you were like Dr. Faust and you had to sell your soul to the devil for knowledge, what would it be?
Well, there's one thing that I really would like to go on an expedition, and a lot of people may not have heard of this, but it basically relates to Australia. Now, a lot of people think Australia is just sort of desert, you got like a few cities like Adelaide and Sydney, and the rest is just desert and kangaroos. That's not like that at all. There's massive portions of Australia, which are forest, rainforest. I mean, gigantic areas like this. There's crocodiles and alligators. I mean, it really is kind of almost like in the Everglades in much of portions of Australia. And up until round about 10,000 years ago, there was a gigantic monitor lizard. If you've seen a picture of like a Komodo dragon, these really large, vicious monitor lizards. There used to be one that lived in Australia up to about 10,000 years ago called Megalania, and it was a huge monitor lizard that could grow to about 20 feet long and sometimes maybe a little bit more than that. And it's interesting that particularly in the 1800s, the 1900s, and early part of the 20th century, there were reports of people still seeing Megalania, these large, huge, vicious lizards, in the wilds of Australia up to the 20th century. But there are a number of reports also from the 1950s, and the latest I've got is the 1980s. And for me, that would be like the ultimate kind of expedition to go on, would be to go to Australia and investigate some of these reports of these sort of 25-foot long monitor lizards and prove that against all the odds that Megalania didn't become extinct after all, but that possibly could be lurking in the wilder, deeper and darker rainforests and so on. And just say, yep, I found it,
Well, I got to be honest with you, that wasn't what I expected.
Hey, no kidding.
Well, that would be fascinating right there. I was thinking the same thing, but my favorite prehistoric creature is the megalodon. the giant shark.
I thought he was going to say Barney.
You stole my idea, dude. I was going to say the Megalodon, too.
Yeah, the Megalodon. I mean, the sheer immense size and the power of that thing, because sharks are nothing but eating machines anyway. If I can, prove that maybe one of those is still in the deep, dark parts of the ocean that we can't go down to, that, to me, that would be it. That and being able to discover the aliens.
I got to be honest. You guys are picking out things that you might see them, but then you're not going to get to tell anybody, because a 25-foot lizard is going to eat you. A shark's going to. I mean.
Yeah, that's right. I'd probably end up as lunch or something.
Yeah, right.
Oh, I know. You know it right.
I finally discovered it. That's it.
So Nick, I don't know if you're familiar. Probably not. But when I was about 15 years old, I had a dog man experience that I've told this story. It's terrifying. I was out for a run, believe it or not. And this thing was in the corn, and it was following me and pacing me. And when I finally was able to get away, I'm not telling the story all over again, but I saw it, and it was 6 foot tall. And at the time, the only frame of reference, because this was like 1985, 86, somewhere in there, the only frame of reference I had was the Egyptian god Anubis, because I never thought werewolf, because as a kid growing up, I grew up with Lon Chaney, wearing a pair of jeans and a torn flannel shirt and a flat face, but. So for me, I've seen a dog man. I know that it exists. I know it's real. For me, what I'd love to really know is if faeries from Iceland were real, and that they were really interdimensional beings, and that you could split through the veil and go from our world to their world, and that you could have life everlasting.
The fairy
immortality.
Oh, isn't
fairies,
that part
fairies,
of
the whole lore is they're immortal.
Isn't that part of the Middle Earth lore?
Nick, you want to chime in on this?
Well, I mean, if you can look all around the world and find legends and mythology and folklore of the little people, that kind of thing.
Right.
But if you go back and look at the older stories versus today, what we have today, it's kind of all been sort of dumbed down, where the little people are sort of like little glistening creatures with wings, that kind of look like fairies and angels, and kind of like Tinkerbell, that kind of thing, or sort of thing you'd see on like a Christmas card, But that's sort of the dumbed down version of what was taken very seriously, particularly in Europe, Scotland, Ireland, the UK, Germany, France, where they all had their traditions of as I said, quote, the little people. And, they would very often live in sort of caverns and caves and things like this. And, this is sort of where we get a lot of the legends of fairies and goblins and brownies and things like that. But you often find that there's a reality in most mythology and folklore. And, just a few years ago, about 15 years ago, there was the discovery that what became known as Flores Man, or it became more popularly known, excuse me, as like this sort of, almost like a goblin-type creature. So we know that there were sort of like primitive, small humanoids, going back 10, 20, 30,000 years. And so I think there were, genuine sort of small, humanoid-type figures that were probably an offshoot of the human race, and that, existed in stealth, and they would hide out, etc., etc. But then again, you have the more magical aspects, like when you mentioned people would see these things and they would almost go into like a trance, and they would be taken to the fairy kingdom, that kind of thing, and time would slow down, and everything seems strange. And actually, in many respects, the stories are very similar to like alien abductions today, and so that there are some parallels there. But I still get reports of, occasionally, not many, but occasionally I'll get reports of people who've seen sort of small humanoids. A friend of mine, Mac Tonis, he died young, unfortunately, in 2010, but he wrote a book called The Cryptoterrestrials just before he died, and he talked in there about traditions of like the little people, and he felt that it was a genuine phenomenon which had been sort of, kind of discarded almost by, the folklore of fairies and things like that. So I do think we could make a good case that there are around the world sort of primitive humanoids that keep away from us and that are occasionally seen, and that they've led to the development of the mythology of things like goblins and I think brownies, fairies, that kind of thing. So.
Well, in Iceland, they still take that very serious. I mean, they'll.
I got to be honest with you. The idea of a bunch of little people like running in here and not being able to swat them off and trying to attack you, run up your pant leg and stuff like mice. It's kind of scary.
Well, yeah. I mean, in Iceland, for example. They take it extremely seriously, the little people. I mean, this is not a joke or an exaggeration, but in some areas in Iceland where they believe that sacred sites of the little people still exist, they will actually divert a new road around those areas because they feel it's bad luck to sort of affect and damage these sacred areas and sacred sites of the little people. And, you imagine... sort of one of our highways, and the local county guy whose job it is, to sort of work on the road. So sorry, we can't put the road going through that particular area because it's a sacred little people site. The person would probably be like locked up for being crazy, but in Iceland, they're like, oh yeah, we daren't sort of affect or damage that sacred site. But it's
stories.
Okay. We'll just make the road go around it. And everybody's like, okay.
Yeah, there's stories where they're building roads, and then the machinery keeps breaking down, and then they bring in, and this is not the correct term, they bring in like a faeryologist, and they'll say, oh, well, you're in a sacred area, you got to move this road, and they move the road.
Yeah,
I mean, they do. They're like, well, you know what? Sorry, we kind of veered the road in this area, and the machines won't work every night. There's mischief, and they're like, and then when they move the road, they don't have any problems. I mean, there's tons of stories like that.
Well, I think one of the reasons why people think it's strange is because, it's so different to the majority of the way modern day civilization is. But if you think about it, it was only sort of 400 or 500 years ago, that widespread belief in goblins, in fairies, in gnomes, and all those kind of things, and people back then kind of were revered the fairies, but they were frightened of them as well. It was kind of like you had to be careful how you tackled with them and so on. And that's not that long ago. I mean, it was still up to like 300 years ago in the UK. They were still burning people at the stake. So
well, they were doing that.
So in other words, ancient traditions in the world of the supernatural really did dominate the lives of people for centuries. I mean, 300 years ago, a black cat runs in front of you. I mean, that was a major issue. You don't think about it today, and but back then, I mean, a lot of things were dictated and dominated by, by supernatural phenomena that we've kind of lost that sensation to a large degree of like this magical realm. People just think it's just for Hollywood or whatever, but I don't think it is. I think there's way more to the world, a lot more mysteries than we understand, and we've just relegated them to tales to tell your kids, before they go to sleep at night. So.
Hey, Nick, and I apologize if I have the wrong book, but I think there's a chapter in one of your books about secret societies. Am I in the right track? Or am I in the wrong book?
Well, there's a few books where I've sort of touched on secret societies.
Is there one that's it's a UK story about there's where you take cats and you roast them for I don't know how many 2 days. Oh, this is a creepy one.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, give us a This is a good one.
Yeah, this is a tradition that goes back centuries, like 400 or 500 centuries in Scotland, and it's called the Tairm, but it's Taigh, and basically what it was like this, like you said, like a secret society of powerful people who would essentially get into what you would call like a Faustian pact. You know, you do a deal with the devil for money, for power, etc., etc., and people would sort of take part in these pacts, and it would involve, it'd be kind of grisly, but it would be, they would throw cats, unfortunately, onto the fires, and they would go through this ritual, the ritual of the Tairm, and supposedly out of the flames would come these huge black cats with fiery red eyes, and you would sort of say or think to this supernatural large cat what it's you want. Is it money? Is it power? What is it? And reportedly, you know, you would get something in return, but you had to sort of, you know, there would be a price to pay. You know, you might have to do something on their part. But that's the Tairm, this kind of really grisly ritual, went on for a long, long time. And there are actually rumours that in some of the wilder, more desolate and forested parts of Scotland that it's still practiced. You know, kind of, you give me something, I'll give you something, and it's like this supernatural pact between a human and a demon, basically.
Is my memory correctly that they would put these cats, live cats, on a spit, and you had to turn it for like 2 days over a fire, and then if you know you had to, you couldn't break the turning of it, and then that would basically gin up these spirits or whatever. Nick knows more than I do, obviously, and crazy. And that there were, and if I think I remember correctly, Nick, you referenced that there were certain powerful families in Scotland that I believe were part of this, I don't know, secret society or secret pact, even to this day.
Yeah, well, in Scotland, you know, you've got a lot of old families, you know, that they've still got their castles, you know, still exist from 300-400 years ago, and there are rumours that some of these powerful families, you know, that have ancestries going back, you know, 600-700 years, that kind of thing, that they kind of still, you know, understand the old ways and these old beliefs, and are willing to sort of enter into a pact as a means to continue the power of that particular family or this particular family. But yeah, it was like a long, drawn-out process of, you know, unfortunately roasting these cats, and then eventually there would be the sudden appearance of kind of what looked like something like a black jaguar, something like that, you know, like a large Black Panther type kind of cat. That's how they would appear as, you know, they would throw or put on the regular cats, but then out of the flames would come these large, sort of red-eyed, you know, really big kind of cat-like animals, and then you would sort of say what you wanted, and then you have to sort of abide by your part of the bargain. So.
Sort of like making a deal with the devil.
Exactly, that's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Jeez. I mean, and to hear a story like that has to be like going back to the faeries and there has to be some
element of truth
to that, because we have good imaginations. I couldn't
even make something.
I'm
like
not
that
making up. And as much as I dislike cats, I really am not going to go to that length of roasting a cat.
Well, Scotland has.
I don't mind cats, but it's just not my favorite.
But you don't want to roast one.
Nick, no. Scotland has a very famous black cat that roams the moors and stuff, don't they? Am I wrong on that?
Yeah, well, actually, a lot of people every year see large black cats in the UK. Now, of course, you know, there are no large, or there should not be any large black cats in the UK. The only cats in the UK are house cats, you know, pet cats, and there's also in Scotland, there's what's called the Scottish wildcat. But, I mean, they're pretty vicious, but they're only really very, very slightly bigger than a normal house cat, and their build is just like a regular house cat. But they're just slightly bigger, but they're nothing to be frightened of. They just kind of hiss at you and scowl and wander off back into the woods. But we're talking about people seeing...
Wait, are you talking about my ex-wife? Or no, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
You said that, me, not me. But yeah, every year people, probably 40, 50 reports per year, maybe something like that, people see huge, large black cats, look something like I said, like a black jaguar, that kind of thing, black panther, black leopard. Now, there's nothing indigenous, to the UK that anything like that, but people report them to this day. But what's interesting, people have often said, well, they've just escaped from zoos and enclosures and, somebody's had it as a secret pet and it's got too big and they had to let it go. That may well be the case in some examples, but what's interesting is the places where these large black cats in the UK to this day are still seen. And very often it's like graveyards, cemeteries, old bridges, which are all classic places sort of connected to the paranormal. A friend, well, not so much a friend of mine, but a colleague of mine, Marcus Matthews, Marcus told me probably about 15 years ago that he investigated a case where somebody had seen one of these large black cats in a crop circle in England. And they've also been seen around ancient stone circles in the UK. Not specifically Stonehenge, but there are a lot of smaller stone circles in the UK, and they've been seen around them. So I think there could be some sort of connection between what was going on with the Tayam like centuries ago and the black cats we see in the UK today. I think they could somehow be a connection, because you would not see, it's one thing to see a large black cat roaming around, the size of sort of like a leopard, but then to see it in a crop circle or a stone circle or in a graveyard, that really kind of pushes it down like a paranormal pathway. So I think the old traditions of, doing the deals with these large black cats, I think it could be somehow interconnected with what people are seeing today.
And these are widespread. These are the Scottish Highlands, Celtic legends in Ireland, and
Yep.
I think some people associate them as sort of a fairy creature, a spectral.
Yeah.
Well, you wonder if you summon up like a big, supernatural. What if it takes the more physical form of the leopard or the panther type?
Well, there's a legend. There's a legend, I think, in Ireland. I think under Celtic or maybe even Gaelic, they believe that these large cats are actually witches that have the power to transform from a person to a cat 9 times within their lifespan. So these are witches that you're seeing versus a spectral ghostly thing. So it's all over the board.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, if you go back and you look into the mythology of, say, the 1600s and 1700s, you see a large black cat. It's basically like a shape-shifting witch, that kind of thing. And it was believed that witches could change into large black cats, bats, large birds like ravens, frogs, toads, hedgehogs, anything that was sort of, could scurry around the landscape and not be sort of perceived or seen for what they actually were. Again, you see a large black cat, or even just a regular house cat, or a toad comes into your home. A frog comes hopping into your home. Things like that were like today we just put it outside, in the local river or whatever, give it its freedom, but back then, to have something like that happen in your house, I mean, your next door neighbor tells you they saw a frog in your house, you could be hauled off, and fried on the spit,
I'm going to tell you, I'd be a little miffed if the judge got turned into a Black Panther and I got turned into a hedgehog. Right. That's like I'm getting the short end of the stick.
I would think that the hedgehog is more along your spirit animal.
my spirit.
Nick, so Nick, awesome topics tonight because a lot of our listeners, they probably, and I'm not going to say that I should say this, or maybe I should say it, maybe they get tired of hearing about Bigfoot. Tonight we got to talk about a lot of different topic areas.
Well, Bigfoot's the rock star, but
he is. But there's a lot of people out there that want to hear more than about Bigfoot.
That's true. Mm-hmm.
So it was awesome talking to you tonight about different things. And I can't say this enough. If you're interested in the paranormal and cryptids and secret society, all kinds of stuff, go get Nick's monster book. It's a 421 pages of easy reading. It's exciting. You don't have to sit down for an hour and read it. You can pick it up and read 5-10 pages at a time. To me, it sits by my bed, and if I get 5-10, and I have a busy life, 5-10 minutes, love to pick it up. Love to read it.
Did you just say he has a busy life?
I have a busy life. So, but
well, Nick, what? So before we let you go, are you working on anything new? You got any new books you're working on that are coming out? Any television appearances?
Projects that you'd like to let people know about?
I'm not so much TV because with all the restrictions on travel and everything, everything's even sort of paranormal TV.
Yeah,
pretty much
that's the
coming
reason.
to a halt right now.
It's the reason I'm not on TV right now too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
America's Most Wanted.
But in terms of books, I've just had a new one come out about 3 weeks ago called Assassinations, and it's like a history of assassinations throughout history, going from like Julius Caesar and the pharaohs, Jack the Ripper, who shot JFK, why was John Lennon killed, and post 9/11 assassinations, things like that. And then in August, I've got a book coming out called Monsters of the Deep, which is like again like a 400 pages long study of sea serpents, lake monsters, giant turtles, giant squid, things like that. Then towards the end of the year, I've got a book coming out called The Martians, and that's a study of whether in the distant past Mars may have been like the Earth, and there could have been a Martian race, and so it looks at the issue of a lot of these strange structures that have been photographed on Mars by NASA, and whether there was a race that similar to us that maybe destroyed themselves millions of years ago, and there are a few remnants of their civilization left. So that one will be out in October.
The judge would now like to retract his statement about he leads a busy life.
I was going to say, I don't know.
3 books out.
3 books, all the research into it, because having read Nick's books,
well,
these are books that you can tell they're incredibly well written. He puts a lot of time into them, so it takes a lot of research hours. I can't imagine.
Well, it does, but a lot of people don't realize. People think I do this like 24/7. I don't have a life, but that's actually not true. I mean, what I like to do, I write 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. That's sort of how I like to do it. I get up, have breakfast, watch a bit of news, mess around on Facebook for a while, and I like to work like 9 to 5 doing the writing, and then 5 o'clock comes round, I put the laptop in sleep mode, and it doesn't get touched till the next morning, 9 a.m. And then Fridays, I usually stop work about 4 o'clock. The laptop goes into sleep mode at 4 p.m. Friday. I don't touch it again till Monday morning. So that way, I've got evenings free. I've got every weekend free, and it might be like, Friday night I'll take a girlfriend out, for dinner, and then Saturday night I'll go out with a bunch of friends. We'll go and see a band or whatever. But not right now. I mean, we're all stuck inside. But but yeah, I like to sort of balance having a fun, social life. But I'm good at like switching off and giving myself plenty of time.
So that leads into a segue, and I think we're going to ask you a question that maybe no other podcast or TV show has asked you.
Oh boy!
If we pick you up in the RV what intoxicating liquors do you want us to bring?
Well, there's one beer that I really like. It's called Stack. Have you ever heard of it?
Never heard of it.
No, most people haven't. It gets hidden away in gas stations mainly. But, it's called Stack, and it's a beer. It's like a clear beer, but it's 10% proof, and it's beer. And
all right.
So I like Stack. I like whiskey and Coke. Those are my two.
I think we can accommodate. We can accommodate you.
And then where would we point the RV to first?
Obviously, we're not driving.
We're not going to Australia.
We're not driving to Australia to do giant lizards.
You're not getting off Eddie's.
Well, I think it might be Point Pleasant because I haven't been there for a while. I've been about 18 months, and I really like going to all around the Mothman areas. Not just the town itself, which is a cool. You've got the museum and all the big displays and the statue of Mothman. But also, you can go and still see the exact places where the Mothman was seen in 66, 67, and it's just sort of cool place to go. So I think that would have to be first, and then maybe make a very short journey, maybe about an hour and a half, to Flatwoods, West Virginia, where they had the Flatwoods monster in the 1950s, and then just sort of keep going, one to the other.
I would like to go. See, I want to go down to Kentucky.
So he needs to fly to Columbus, then we can pick him up and go.
Oh no,
I don't want to drive to
because Nixon, Texas. Right?
Yeah.
Oh, Texas is wonderful. Listen, Texas, and I've been researching this. Texas has the largest motorhome dealerships in the world. So
we're just going to buy it there. We're just going to buy it.
I'm just going to buy it. I'm going to fly down, buy it, throw Nick in the back. You're going to drive. Nick, Jason, and I.
You guys are going to be drinking Stack
We're just going to we're going to get hammered drunk.
Yeah.
And by the time we sober up, we'll be to the Mothman Festival.
And Elisa can meet us there.
She can meet us there, short drive. Okay. But I want to take a trip, Nick, over to Spotsville, Kentucky, home of the Spotsville Monster.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Great. Hey, all those aren't that very far apart. So, and I tell you what, when we're driving between 9 and 5, we won't bother you.
You can ride on.
You can drive. I'm going to sleep. I'll sleep. We'll do it this way. Grover Drive. I'll sleep from 9 to 5. And then we'll be up all night.
No, I won't be working 9 to 5 if I'm in the vehicle. It's all good.
I do have before we let you.
I mean, joking aside, the main reason why I do. I mean, it isn't just because of the social side. I like to take weekends off and evenings, but also it's just so I don't get burned out. And I've found that if you do try and, particularly with writing, if you're trying to write your best, but you burn yourself out, you just don't do. It just doesn't work well. So you need that kind of. It's whether if you work at the local store or your car mechanic or whatever, you want your time off. Otherwise, you just.
It's interesting.
That's sort of the same with me, really.
It's interesting because when I studied for the bar exam, a guy told me, he said, listen, treat it like a job. Get up, study from 9 to 5. That's 8 hours. And then you have the rest of the day because studying for the bar exam in Ohio will absolutely murder you, burn you out. You'll be frazzled. And a guy said, listen, any studying you do after 8 hours is wasted study time. Your retention's zero.
Right, but I wouldn't want, like I said at the beginning, I wouldn't want people to think I view it just as a job. I don't. What I do is my passion. That's the primary thing. If I hadn't got that enthusiasm for it, I'd be going back to like a forklift driver that I was before.
Well, you still got the license. You still got
the license. Yeah.
So Grover's going to pitch. Grover's going to pitch to the Travel Channel.
Oh yeah,
Travels with Nick.
Oh, there you go.
On the forklift.
Yeah, travel with Nick, and we'll just drive around. We'll drive around the country, and we'll get a forklift with you if you want to do some showing off and stuff like that.
Now I do want to before we let you go. Now I stopped for the first time last summer in Point Pleasant on the way back from the Carolinas. That is one weird. What's the feeling you get standing there in Point Pleasant? I mean, because I remember just standing there and just kind of soaking it in,
Well-
and it was late. It was after everything was closed. Like it was like 6 o'clock. Even the museum was closed and stuff. And I tell you what, it was a weird vibe. Like, am I imagining that, or is that just?
No, it does have that eerie feeling to it. The town. It's particularly if you're sort of walking around like 9 o'clock and you see the big silver statue of Mothman, and it is kind of like the downtown area that time of night is quite quiet. But what also I kind of find a little bit eerie, but in a cool way, is that when you actually get out of the town itself. You've got huge hills, I mean, almost like mountains, but just covered in trees and bushes. And you kind of get the feeling that, wow, things really could hide in there and never be found, It's just massive amounts of woodland, on huge hills and gigantic hills. You could really, driving along and think to yourself, well, there could be like primitive Bigfoot-type creatures, just sort of staring down at the roads, down below, like 200 feet down or whatever. So you do get that feeling that there's a lot of kind of secrets in that area.
Well, that's just great, because I just thought it was weird. Now you've given me a whole another level of being creeped out. Oh, man. Well, if you do make it back to Point Pleasant, we'll meet you there with some stack. I'll leave the judge, and he can find the stack beer.
I'm going to the gas station trying to find some stacked beer.
Honestly, that's the only places I can find it, and so
Being from the
UK,
I guess being from the UK, beer over there probably has a higher alcohol content. Is that why you gravitate towards stack?
Yeah, it is, but I like the taste of it as well. It's just a nice, it's a nice cold beer. So,
Yeah.
All right. Well, on that note, I wonder how many of our listeners will go out and try to.
I wonder how many
They're
listeners
gonna all go for
Here's
it.
what I'm going to do. I'm going to go buy some stack stock and see, because it's going to go up after.
In this
Maybe
episode,
they could-
this episode
maybe they
from
can
the
make me their spokesperson.
You
or
should.
something.
yeah.
World
This
famous.
episode of From the Shadows podcast is brought to you
You
by
by
Nick Redfern and Stack Beer.
Redfern approved stack, that kind of thing.
Oh man! So if you walk out tomorrow and there's a case of that on your front desk, maybe or front walk, that'd be a little bit better than some files from.
Say, the
Yeah,
Philadelphia
Philadelphia.
definitely know someone's listening. There.
Look, the Philadelphia experiment's an old hat. We're talking stacked beer.
All right. Well, on that note, Nick, hey, it was awesome. Spend a couple hours hearing you tell some stories.
Well,
and,
thanks, guys. Thank you.
We really, we certainly.
Thank you for
appreciate
being
it.
on, Nick.
Yeah.
Well, thanks.
And happy
Appreciate
anniversary
you.
to Elisa and
Getting
Nick
me
of
on.
the anniversary of their first meeting.
Yeah, happy anniversary, you two. Now you can
There you
smooch
go.
on.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that was spooky.
Hey, that goes right back into your little synchronicity.
Synchronicity.
Ladies and gentlemen, a final word. Please visit us on our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/From the Shadows Podcast, and on our Instagram page at instagram.com/From the Shadows Podcast. You can visit our webpage at FromTheShadowsPodcast.GoDaddySites.com, or contribute to our Facebook discussion page called After the Shadows, and tweet us on our Twitter feed at twitter.com/podcast_from. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to hearing from you all. Until next time, never shy away from the darkness or what may be lurking in the shadows. We are out.